Welcome to Echo 201, Study Session 4, Consumer Equilibrium. Introduction. This study session will introduce you to the theory of consumer equilibrium. You'll be exposed to two of the most important theories of consumer behavior. These are the theory of utility and the theory of indifference curve. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Use utility theory to show how demand curves slopes downwards from left to right. 2. Perform simple manipulations with indifference curve. Utility theory. Utility can be described as a satisfaction a consumer derives from the consumption of a commodity. It is useful to distinguish between total utility and marginal utility. Total utility refers to the total satisfaction derived from consuming some commodities. Marginal utility, on the other hand, is the change in satisfaction resulting from consuming a unit more or less of that commodity. Utility schedule and graph. The table below will help you understand better the utility theory. Number of plates of rice consumed: 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Total utility: 0, 4, 7, 9, 10, 10. Marginal utility: dash 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. The marginal utility column is derived from the changes in total utility by consuming an additional plate of rice. For instance, when you increase the plates of rice you consume from 2 to 3 plates, your total utility increases from 7 to 9 utils. This increase in your total utility, which is 2, gives the value for marginal utility. A cursory look at the marginal utility column in table 4.1 will tell you one important characteristic of marginal utility. This is the successive decline in marginal utility from additional consumption of plates of rice. While you can observe that total utility has been increasing, marginal utility has been decreasing as consumption of rice increases. A question that may naturally come to mind is, can marginal utility reach 0? The answer is yes, as you can see from table 4.1. With more commodities consumed, there is a level of marginal consumption after which additional consumption is 0. Commodities include water, beverages, and even reading. Figure below illustrates total and marginal utility. Relationship between total utility and marginal utility. If total utility is increasing at a decreasing rate, as depicted in our example, then marginal utility declines with increase in consumption. When total utility reaches its maximum point, that is at point C, then the marginal utility is equal to 0. This is because after the point, any additional unit consumed will lead to a fall in total utility. The declining slope of the marginal utility curve reflects the law of diminishing marginal utility, which states that the more of a given commodity consumed, the less the addition to total utility. Maximizing utility. Marginal utility. Certain assumptions are made with respect to the utility theory of consumer behavior. These assumptions include that commodities are available, prices and incomes are fixed. Perhaps the most basic assumption is that members of the household seek to maximize their total utility. The basic problem that faces the household is how to adjust its expenditure and to maximize the total utility of its members. A rational household will go about this by arranging its expenditure among commodities in such a way that utility gained from the last naira spent on all commodities are equal. An example will make this point clear. If a consumer is faced with two commodities X and Y with prices PX and PY respectively, furthermore, let MUX and MUY be the marginal utilities of the last unit of commodities X and Y respectively. If marginal utility derived from the last naira spent on commodity X is greater than that of Y, then the consumer will continue to substitute X for Y. As quantities of X consumed increases, its marginal utility will fall, while the fall in the quantity of Y will raise its marginal utility. This process of substitution of X for Y will continue until marginal utility per naira spent on X and Y are equal. Algebraically, this implies that the ratio of X of Y to its price is equal to the ratio of marginal utility of Y to its price. That is, MUX over PX equals MUY over PY. This is the fundamental equation of the utility theory of demand. Each household demands each commodity up to the point at which marginal utility per naira spent on it is the same as marginal utility per naira spent on every other commodity. When this condition is met, the household cannot increase its total utility by shifting a kobo of expenditure from one commodity to another. For consumer equilibrium, two conditions must be met. The first is the one given above, that is, ratio of marginal utility of one commodity to its price is equal to the ratio of marginal utility of the other commodity to its price. The second requirement is that total expenditure on the commodities be equal to the household's income. That is, in a former example, X PX plus Y PY should be equal to I, where I is income. That is total expenditure on good X, and YPY is total expenditure on Y. PX and PY represent price of X and Y respectively. Paradox of value. Early economists were unable to explain the paradox of value because they erroneously believed that commodities with high total utilities should be expensive because people value them highly and vice versa. They were thus arguing that market values should be related to total utilities. These economists referred to market values as exchange values and to total utility as users' value. They posed their problem by saying what used value should be, but were observed not to be related to exchange values. However, we know that in real life, market behavior is not related to total utility but marginal utility. Water is cheap because there is so much of it that people consume it to the point at which marginal utility is very low, and they are not prepared to pay a high price to obtain a little more of it. Diamonds are very expensive because they are scarce and people have to stop consuming them at the point where marginal utility is still high. Thus, consumers are prepared to pay a high price for an additional diamond consumed. The indifference theory of household behavior was developed by Sir John R. Hicks in his book Value and Capital, published in 1939. The major innovation of this theory was that, unlike the utility theory, it did not invoke the notion of a measurable concept of utility. An indifference curve. An indifference curve shows all combinations of commodities that yield the same level of satisfaction to the household. A household is indifferent between the combinations indicated by any 2 points on one indifference curve. In the table we have bundle A, B, C, D, and E. Clothing 30, 18, 13, 10, and 8. Food, we have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. The table above could be converted into an indifference curve as indicated below. The household who owns the indifference curve above is indifferent between points A, B, C, D, and E. Features of an indifference curve. Number 1, it's downward sloping, indicating that if the household is to have less of one commodity, it must have more of the other one to compensate. For instance, in the figure above, for the household to move from point A to B, it must reduce the quantity of clothing consumed from 30 to 18 units, while quantity of food consumed would increase from 5 to 10 units. 2. Indifference curve is convex. Moving down the curve to the right, its slopes gets flatter and flatter. The slope of the curve is the marginal rate of substitution, the rate at which one commodity must be substituted for the other in order to keep total utility constant. Indifference map. It refers to a set of indifference curves. The farther from the origin an indifference curve is, the higher the level of satisfaction associated with that indifference curve. Thus, any curve above and to the right of an indifference curve will be preferred to the one below it. The budget line. An important assumption under the theory of demand is that household spends all of its income on goods and services for current consumption. It neither spends more than its income nor save any of it. For instance, we assume that the household income I is spent on 2 commodities, clothing and food. Then the budget line of such a household will reveal the amount of clothing and food the household could afford given its income and the prices of the 2 commodities. Equilibrium of the household. Whereas the indifference map describes the wish of the household, what it could actually demand is dictated by its budget line. Figure 4.5 below brings together the household taste as shown by its indifference curve and possibilities open to it as shown by the budget line. Any point on the budget line is attainable, but the question is which one the household will choose in its objective of maximizing satisfaction. Suppose that this stands from point A in figure 4.4, where it is on indifference curve 1. It moves to point B. It is on its budget line, but it has moved to a preferred position since I2 is greater than I1. This process continues until it reaches point C. Any point beyond C, say D or E, will result in lower indifference curve. Thus, it could be seen that the household reaches its maximum satisfaction at point C. At this point, the indifference curve is tangential to the budget line. Hence, at point C, the slope of the indifference curve, that is, the marginal rate of substitution of goods in the household's preference, is equal to the slope of the budget line. The opportunity cost of one good in terms of the other is determined by market prices. Effects of changes in income and prices on equilibrium. A change in income. Changes in income lead to a parallel shift of the budget line inwards to the origin when income falls, and outward from the origin when it rises. For each level of income, there will be an equilibrium position at which an indifference curve is tangent to the relevant budget line. Each such equilibrium position means that the household is doing as well as it possibly can for that level of income. In figure 4.6, as the household's income is twice increased, the budget line moves outward from a tangency with the indifference curve 1, 2, 2, 2, 3. As we move the budget line through all possible levels of income and join all points of equilibrium, we will trace what is called income consumption line. This line shows how consumption bundles changes as income changes with relative price held constant. In other words, income consumption line shows the reaction of the household to changes in its money income with money prices held constant. Change in price. A change in relative price of the two commodities, food and clothing, changes the slope of the budget line. For instance, given a budget line AB, a half cut in the price of food, while price of clothes is kept constant, shift the budget line to AG, and if price is double the price increase will shift the budget line to AR. Therefore, the locus of tangency between an indifference curve and a budget line as the prices of food changes while price of clothing is held constant gives the price consumption line. This line shows how consumption of the two commodities vary as price of one changes, the price of the other and the household money income being kept constant. Summary. In the course of this study session, you examine some important concepts in consumer equilibrium theory. These include utility and indifference curve theory. These two different theories are alternative ways of explaining consumer behaviors. While utility curve is based on the assumption of cardinal analysis that is measurable, indifference curve is ordinal. In other words, analysis is not based on measurability of consumer satisfaction. This is the end of study session 4. Thanks for listening.